During the Civil War, a Confederate Army surgeon described a flesh-eating disease that killed almost half of those infected. The disease was known as hospital gangrene. Again, likely necrotizing fasciitis. In 1884, Dr. Jean-Alfred Fournier, a French physician with a passion for venereal diseases, described a flesh-eating disease of the scrotum, a type of necrotizing fasciitis he named after himself, Fournier's gangrene. I would have named it Jessica's gangrene after my 7th grade bully, but there's a lot of ego in medicine, and sometimes you just want to be remembered for the little dangly bits of humanity you saved. That was an excerpt from the upcoming book, 99 Ways to Die, authored by emergency physician Dr. Ashely Alker, who's joining us on the podcast today. She is an emergency medicine physician and public health advocate who spent her career translating complex science into practical life-saving advice. She's trained in molecular biology, public health, emergency medicine, and served as a healthcare consultant and medical advisor for TV and film projects. She's delivered a TEDx talk on understanding dying, and now distills years in the ER in her new book, 99 Ways to Die and How to Avoid Them. It's a fast, funny, and deeply practical guide to the many ways people actually get into trouble and how to stay out of it. Ashely, I am so excited to have you on here and to talk about living and dying and all the things that go into it. ER folks are some of my favorite people. You have such a great sense of humor. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, we definitely have a distinct sense of humor, as you saw in that first passage.
Yeah, and that's just, so why did I pick that passage? Well, I'm a real sucker for venereal diseases like Dr. Fournier, apparently, and the fact that we're bringing up scrotums and things like that right off the bat and flesh-eating disease, I mean, you know how to hook an audience. There's something in here for everybody. You cover a large swath of medical issues. I mean, there's 99 of them in here, but even just looking at the table of contents, you've got everything from tuberculosis to just generally butt stuff. And I love that. I'm really looking forward to this book coming out. For everybody that's listening or watching right now, it came out today, and we're going to get into it here a little bit. I want to start off with just not your book right now, Ashely. You're a doctor. You're an emergency physician. You're on the leading cutting edge of what is impacting communities across the nation right now. Why is everybody so sick right now?
Yeah. So, I mean, most of that is unfortunately, respiratory diseases during 'tis the season, and during the winter, especially in colder places, people are inside, they're closer to each other. It's not, rocket science. We all know that when we all get together for Christmas, somebody goes home with, the flu or COVID or something unnamed. And that is usually just because we're all closer, we're all indoors, and, people are often sick before and sometimes a little bit after they have symptoms. And so those are the kind of patient zeros that sneak in on accident and get everybody else sick. So that's some of it. And then this year we have a particularly virulent flu strain, unfortunately. So, every year, there is a flu vaccine that's developed, and the flu vaccine basically is for flu A and flu B, which are two different type of strains. And the flu A vaccine targets the capsule proteins called H and N, and these proteins are kind of determined, as well as the flu B strains, by what has kind of happened in previous flu seasons across the world. And we take that information and we kind of distill it down, and we try and conjecture through the scientific, minds come together and try and decide what the flu vaccine should be for this year and how we should prevent it. But the flu is a very resourceful virus, and it mutates at a rate that is very, very high. And because of that, some years when the flu gets to us, it is already mutated so much that the vaccine is no longer effective. From what we're seeing, I'm not saying that that's 100% what's happening this year, but the flu vaccine, that's why it's never 100% effective. That's why sometimes it just decreases the severity of the disease, but you still contract the flu, is because it takes a lot of know-how to get the right vaccine together. And then even if you do, if the virus mutates before it gets to us, then everybody ends up with some symptoms from the flu. But the bigger thing is that with both flu and COVID, when you're vaccinated, the symptoms are often less, and you don't end up hospitalized and you don't end up dead. And there's a whole, section of the book that's vaccine preventable diseases. So one of the reasons that we're probably sick right now is also that people aren't getting vaccinated, and vaccines are being less and less used, and there's more vaccine hesitancy, and that's a very big multifactorial problem. But it's something that needs to be addressed, because vaccines are one of the greatest tools of modern medicine. And it's one of the things that keep us out of the hospital and keep us, out of the emergency room. So you don't have to hang out with me.
I think that's interesting. And it's kind of crazy to think about the genesis of the vaccine hesitancy. This is a hot topic for a lot of people.
Sure.
But I remember, I feel like in the 90s, when I was a young kid still, anti-vaxxers, right? It was like, oh, Jenny McCarthy's out there talking about it, and people kind of made fun of her about it. And it was this kind of whatever thing, and nobody actually really took it seriously. And then ever since, I think particularly the COVID pandemic and sort of distrust around that specific vaccine has now resulted in distrust of all vaccines and questioning all vaccines. I'm not going to try to sit here and suss out what's the good shots or what's the bad shots to get or anything like that. You're much more equipped to do that. But I'm just kind of curious. I'm sure you've got people that come into the ER and ask questions, or even just friends and family, because you're the probably go-to medical advice person in your circles. Yeah. And there, when people have questions about, hey, is this legit or not? I mean, do you, I'm asking you to speak for the broader medical community here, at the primary care or ER level, really where I think the rubber meets the road as far as interface with the public. Do you feel like the medical community is equipped to answer questions from people that are increasingly more skeptical?
That's a very good question, and very timely given the current climate. So I think largely the answer is, do they have the right information and are they correct? I'd say yes. And I'd say yes about 90% of the time. And the reason I would say that is because there was a giant poll that was done of American primary care doctors, and about 90% of them said that they believe vaccines to be safe and effective from the childhood vaccine schedule. So these are the vaccines we've been given for a couple generations now. And 90% of them said vaccines are safe and effective. 10% of them didn't, but I think that we're wrong about 10% of the time. So maybe that's it. But my point being is that the people who are trained in this and understand the science, most of them are vaccinated and most of them trust vaccines. There are, some that do not, and there's multiple reasons from that. Many of them are going to be personal and probably story-based, which whatever their personal story is, which is, I totally get that. We each have our experiences and we attach our emotions to those experiences, but that's not science. And so the science has shown us that these vaccines are safe and effective. The COVID vaccine is a hard one, because clearly, especially for me, watching all of these people die early in the pandemic and the horror that was for the, frontline workers. The vaccine was a savior for me, because I stopped seeing that, right? Like COVID was sometime during the pandemic was the number one cause of death by infectious illness worldwide, right? It knocked TB off the top spot. And then now post-pandemic, it's not even top 10 in the US anymore. Why is that? Well, there's probably a million conspiracy theories, but the truth is it's, a lot of it is the vaccine. Some of it might be viral mutation and people actually getting the virus and getting some immunity to it that way. But, earning your immunity that way comes with many consequences. Ask people with long-term COVID, ask people who were in ICUs and on ventilators and have PTSD and, chronic medical issues from those things. Getting these diseases is not without its cost, and the cost is generally far higher than the cost of a vaccine. I think that a lot of the misinformation during the pandemic, that was a huge multifactorial problem. And you ask whether or not, the medical community is equipped to deliver those messages. And I think to that part of the question, do they have the right information? Yes. Are they equipped to deliver the message? we need to work on that, because we are not engaging and captivating and meeting people where they are with our messaging, and other people, influencers, TikTokers are, and their authority comes from their following instead of their credentialing and their training, and that is very dangerous. So if you have 1 million followers, your message is very, very powerful on one of these platforms, and we didn't get ahead of that as a community, and now we're paying the price. And so there was a lot of misinformation surrounding the COVID vaccine, and there continues to be, but I think right now a lot of the focus is just on childhood vaccinations, because what's more important than our children? I had my first kid this year. She's 1 year old, and I'm her mother, and that's one of the things that I worry the most about, just being her mother, not being a doctor, is am I going to send her to preschool, and is there going to be some kid in the class that's not vaccinated, and what does that mean for her and the rest of the students and for that child? And so that's the really hard thing being a parent in this day and age, is that you want everyone to have their own opinions and their own ability to use whatever they want to use to make their healthcare decisions, but those healthcare decisions affect everybody, and the lack of empathy in our society has really it's taken a toll on things like vaccines. I don't want to get the vaccine, so I shouldn't have to. Well, that's fine, but it affects that. Now you're making that decision for your child, and it's your child ends up with the consequence of that, and then it's a terrible situation. And I do talk about the vaccines and the history of these diseases, and kind of what we've forgotten about in this book, because we never experienced it, right? Joe Rogan was recently on his podcast talking about how when he grew up, everyone had measles. No one had measles when he was growing up. He's talking about the chicken pox. But the point being is that none of those diseases are really seen anymore, because we have vaccines, and none of the associated complications are. So we forgot that pain, and we can't feel the pain that we're not in. And because of that, we don't know what we're asking for with the return of these diseases and what that means. And it's terribly tragic. And even if you choose not to get a vaccine, you don't deserve that. And so I think that that's kind of what I'm hoping the book does for some people, is it kind of approaches it in a lighthearted way, like, this is the information, do what you will with it. But there are no conspiracy theories in this book. It's all just science.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of interesting things that you said there. I think there's a large variety of influencers out there. I mean, there's some doctors that are influencers.
Oh, sure.
I think about like the Dr. Mike channel on YouTube. I think he's great. And, and then there's a lot of other people too that are maybe not trained, but position themselves as health influencers. And I think that is a struggle. And you're competing with some of these personalities, but so some of my background, Ashely, I used to embed with the military a lot around the world and do some conflict reporting, specifically with the special operations side of the house. And one thing that I frequently ran into is typically, the nature of special operations is very secretive. They're a very closed community for the most part, not super friendly to journalists, generally speaking. And the argument I would make to public affairs officers and commanders that were skeptical was, if you don't tell your story, somebody else will, and you might not like the story that they tell. And I think that applies to the medical community, and actually a lot of different facets of the scientific community. I think more facets of the scientific and medical community need people like what Neil deGrasse Tyson is to the physics world, the astrophysics world. There needs to be those people, and I think you're one of them for the medical community with this book. You're somebody, you talk about it, you know how to translate this to everybody, and you can do it in an engaging, funny way. That's half the battle. But it's like, there needs to be more of that, and for more disciplines within medicine. And, certainly it shouldn't be all on your shoulders alone to carry this fight. Yeah. And it's all interesting stuff. And I kind of say, like, as a journalist, your job is to be skeptical and critical. I never want to fault people for being skeptical, but then when audience or evidence is presented, you need to evaluate that honestly and really ask yourself, do you have biases that are making you not want to believe scientific evidence? And this kind of coincides too, I think, with the thing that's been happening lately where we're watching, not just in the US, but around the world, a massive erosion in trust in institutions. And the medical institution is not immune from that. I mean, the military used to be immune from it. That was used to be the highest public trust scores was the military. Even they don't have that trust anymore, and I understand why. So this is an interesting thing, and I'm glad your book is coming out because it is talking about some really important things and is going to give people some background that is digestible to the layman. You didn't write half of this in Latin, I was glad to see.
Yes,
it's very digestible for the layman. I appreciate that.
That's kind of one of the things that is most important to me. Like, I got into medicine because my family was distinctly non-medical. And, my mom had lymphoma when I was a kid and unfortunately was, riddled with health issues all through her life. She had two open heart surgeries, brain surgeries. She had pulmonary hypertension. She had autoimmune hepatitis. And so part of why I went into medicine was because my family never knew what was going on. We never understood what doctors were saying. And she was so sick all the time. And it felt like a game of telephone and nothing made sense. So, I was like, I can be a doctor. And so I, did it. And by the way, it was really hard. So, I've
heard that about medical school.
I got lucky, but it wasn't easy. And, in that process was able to help my mom through some, critical illnesses, but unfortunately she died in my last year of medical school, never saw me become a doctor. And, in order to keep going, I kind of repurposed my mission in order to translate the language of medicine for others. And I've done that through writing, and I've done that through public speaking, and I've done that, which is my least favorite. And I've done that through, screenwriting and technical consulting. And my biggest thing is trying to meet people where they are with the information. Like, you talk about the erosion of trust in our institutions, especially, and, primarily for me, including the medical institution, whether that's hospitals, insurance companies, pharmaceutical companies, or doctors. But doctors and nurses and healthcare professionals are the ones you're always supposed to be able to trust. And I think that you still can, for the most part, but you deserve that conversation as the patient. And you deserve that discussion, and you deserve to find the physicians that work for you and that you can trust. And I think, and they're still out there. It's still like, I work with people who, we dedicate our lives to others. We work 365 days a year, holidays, weekends, birthdays, funerals, weddings. We miss it all just to be in the emergency department to take care of people. And we do that because we care. We don't, you can't pay someone enough to do this job. It's, you see terrible things. You will, you'll lose years off your life. They've done studies on that. This is not a job you do for, for the money. This isn't a career in any sense. It's a calling. And so the people that do this job are always 100% there because they want to help you, or they would just go do something else. So, start there. But then I get it. There's personalities, and especially the emergency room. My God, it's like so fast paced, and anybody who's watching The Pit knows. But these people really do care about you. These doctors and nurses and respiratory therapists and technicians. So, like, going back into the medical community and approaching it with at least that attitude at first, and then trying to find, a primary care doctor that you connect with is like the most important thing to reestablish that trust. But I totally hear you. And it's fair, like with all the misinformation out there, and there are charlatans, there are people who are credentialed, who are doctors, who are passing out faulty information. And even though it's only 1 in 10 or, a very small portion of physicians, they're still there, and it still muddies the water, and it still, ruins the trust. And I think especially during the pandemic, not to mention that thing again. But, during that time period, it was really hard because the answer that was the truth for a long time was often, we don't know, which is not an acceptable answer in the eyes of the public and media. But it was the truth for a long time because it was a new virus and we didn't know, and we didn't have the data.
It was the novel coronavirus.
Yeah. And
so a lot of people found out what novel meant.
And that void, it just got filled. It got filled with madness and with disinformation, and it got filled with trash. And by the time we had information, good information, it was almost too late. And, the effective communication lines hadn't really been created. So that's why I think you're seeing more physician influencers pop up. And God, I despise social media. So I really wish I didn't have to be part of that push, but I am on there. But like, this is more my thing. Like, put me in a room by myself. I'll write you a book, I'll write you a screenplay. Like, leave me be and I can get it done for you. But, because the internet is a dark place. So, but I think the people are the physicians and the nurse practitioners and the physician's assistants and the nurses and the RTs and, the medical professionals they're showing up now and they're in those spaces. And it's, for a long time, it was just Dr. Mike who does a phenomenal job. But now there's, a plethora of medical influencers out there that are really doing it for the right reason and trying to get you good information. And I am, I have doing it for the right reason and I'm trying to get you the right information, but I can't promise to make good social media content because it's just not my thing. So if you do follow me, I apologize.
As you get ready to launch this book, or you're in the process of launching it, it's the media engagements. I've already seen some of the media you've been doing. You've been doing great. You're wonderful to talk to. You give a great interview. So you're doing great. If your Instagram reels are not up to snuff, I think people can give you a pass.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Very kind.
Yeah. Well, you talk about 99 ways to die. And, I want to get into some of those, but obviously you had to whittle the list down a little bit. You've seen people die in all sorts of different ways, I'm sure. And I'm sure you had to distill that in a way of maybe what was the most common or not. So I guess one question is, how did you narrow down to the 99? And, was it all medical or all like what's good reading or a little bit of both? How did you approach that?
So first of all, nobody dies on my shift. So
I love that.
That's rule number one. And then, how did I come up with these? So it was a process. And it started with, okay, I want to give people diseases that are preventable. So, everybody, there's a lot of wellness and, health influencers out there, and books about like eating right and not drinking or smoking and, walking and exercising, like, yes, do those things. It's so, we all know what we should be doing to be healthy. But we kind of forget that and take for granted the fact that there's all these preventable diseases that many of which we don't suffer from because of the communities that we live in, the science and the technology and the medicine that we are privileged to. But, you can die from these things. And we did die from these things for centuries, but we don't see them because they're these invisible illnesses and diseases and, dangers that we just kind of live inside of. And part of it's my job and part of it is just like my baseline and anxiety, but like I see all these things every time I enter a room. So that's what some of these are. It's just a list of the things that are preventable that you do not need to die from. And here they are, everything from rabies to leprosy to strep throat to, car crashes, like, what to do in these situations. How can you prevent these things? Obviously, the vaccine preventable diseases, those are all very heavy on vaccines, but some of them do have treatments, although some of them don't, which is why we created vaccines. It's kind of one of the stipulations that scientists look at when they're created vaccines. Is this deadly? How easy is it to contract? And like those are the ways that we choose the diseases to make the vaccines for. Is it treatable? Which is why, we've been trying so hard for such a long time to create a vaccine for HIV. So those were the diseases that got chosen in there. And then it kind of got further whittled down to like, what have I seen? What stories do I have? I spent a lot of time early in my career in public health abroad. So I lived in Cyprus for a year during graduate school. And then I've spent time in Morocco, Spain, France, Tanzania, Honduras, all working in their different medical systems. So a lot of my stories in medicine come from the emergency department, but there's also a lot of stories in the book from before I was a physician when I was, working mostly in public health. And so, those contributed to the stories that were the chapters that were selected were kind of the things that I've seen in my life. And, one chapter is on serial killers, and that one snuck in there because unfortunately I've met a serial killer. So, that type of thing pulled. And then eventually my editor was like, please, you have got to stop writing. And so my editor, Mark, who's a phenomenal human being, eventually cut me off and was like, thank you for the book. We're good.
What I just, as a fellow author, what was your initial word count looking like?
Oh, so this was the funny thing is I got pregnant like around the time, like a year, almost 9 months, a year before the book was due. So I was pregnant like when I was finishing editing the book, or like right before, sorry, the finished product was due. And so I was worried. I messaged them and I was like, look, I'm going to have a baby, but also like I'm trying to finish this book and I don't know if it's going to happen. So I was terrified my word count was going to be too low. And I sent it to him and I think it was like, I'm trying to remember my initial one because eventually it was 80 and then I think at one point it was 80 and then we got rid of a bunch of chapters and then I think eventually we got it down to 60 something. Yeah, it was too long.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I got in trouble. They were like, please, you're going to have to delete some chapters, which I thank God, because my biggest fear was like that I was going to send it to them. And they're like, there's only 6 words here. What are we supposed to do with this?
Yeah, it is such a nerve-wracking thing. And even, for people that have never seen like what a book deal looks like, you kind of agree on a general word count at the outset, but then you get paranoid about that word count. You're like, well, is this like the bare minimum and I'm supposed to like exceed this? Like if they say 75, does that mean they actually want 100?
Yeah.
Or if I come in at 72, is that like, no, you fail, get out of here? Like you get a little bit paranoid about it.
Totally.
And I totally get that. I didn't know that you traveled internationally so extensively and worked in public health and all this. That's amazing. And it's funny you bring up Morocco. Right before I came over here, there was like an Amazon delivery guy from Morocco that got stuck in my driveway, and I spent about an hour helping him push his delivery vehicle out of the bank. And
nice of you.
He's like, oh yeah, I'm going to Morocco back to Morocco next month. And I'm like, oh man, I'd love to go. I'm obsessed with Casablanca and Marrakesh. I want to go there someday. And it's one of those things that's on my to-do list. And I don't know very much Arabic, but assalamu alaikum gets me by good enough. And,
yes. Ana Ishmi Ashely. I spent a month in Casablanca. Actually, I worked in their emergency department and in like their their public healthcare system. So a lot of countries outside the United States have like 2 separate healthcare systems. They have a public system, where they provide universal healthcare, and then there's often a private system that's pretty expensive. And that is kind of the structure of the Moroccan healthcare system. And so I worked in the public system, and thank God they actually speak French. I speak French, so that's okay. Like in the hospitals, they don't speak Arabic because otherwise I would have been completely lost. So I had an Arabic translator for like seeing patients, but whenever we were doing any like didactics or, just talking in the operating room, it was always in French. So that kind of got me through it. But it was an amazing country, and they were just fantastic physicians, and I learned so much and got to see a lot of diseases, which I actually talk about in the book that like I would have never seen in the United States, specifically diseases that, are seen in like low and middle income countries. So, I think there's a lot of privilege there that we just don't know about. And, I think that me going there and seeing those things, I'm like, oh my gosh, like people die from this disease that, I've read about in books, but we've never even seen here. And that's like a lot of the vaccine preventable diseases for me too. Yeah. And like when you see, especially children suffering from those things, it just, like I said before, emotional memories are very powerful. And so they give you impetus to like have very strongly held beliefs, but these beliefs are also backed up by science. So my hope is that like eventually our society will get there. But yeah, I've been very fortunate. I worked in Paris at their public hospital and in Madrid at a public hospital. And then I did some mobile clinic stuff in both Tanzania and Honduras when I was younger, which was pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, Western Africa is really interesting from a medical perspective just because a lot of places in the world, in developing countries, malaria is still a huge problem.
Of course,
and I'm sure that was something that you've had to deal with a lot. But I mean, Western Africa, I remember I can't remember if this was 4 or 10 years ago, but at some point over the last decade, bubonic plague cropped up again, otherwise known as the Black Plague, right? Like people think of medieval times when you hear that, and then it comes up in the news again, and they had to like start halting flights from Western African countries, and there was a real concern there. I'm curious, did you ever have to deal with that? And 2, that's when you think unique medical situations, how does it get more unique than that?
Yeah, so that particular situation I hadn't encountered. I will say that there's a lot of diseases kind of like that, and one of them is leprosy, where we just kind of think, oh, that doesn't really exist anymore. But leprosy is
it's like a biblical disease.
Yeah, it's
it's literally in the Bible.
Yeah, but it's still in the 126 countries. We just closed our last leprosy colony in Hawaii within the United States, like within the last couple of decades. Like this is not something that is of the past. The only reason that leprosy isn't still like a huge issue is that there's a huge genetic component. So not all people are susceptible to this disease. There's some type of genetic component that makes you susceptible to the disease. So it's not as infectious as COVID or influenza type thing, because not everybody can get it in the same way. And it's a very chronic disease too, right? So it's something that you have for a lifetime and continues to get worse. It's also a treatable disease now. Bubonic plague is kind of like the same thing. It's people think it's completely gone, but it's not. Like the only disease that we've eradicated was smallpox, and that was via a vaccine. So that disease doesn't exist on the planet anymore, except for in 2 labs, which are in 2 places that they probably could probably be better.
Yeah. That's the other terrifying thing is this idea, and you actually cover bioweapons and things like that, but things like smallpox have been weaponized, and it's lots of other things have been weaponized, and that is one of the more scary, terrifying things that I occasionally keep me up at night if I let myself wander too much.
Yeah, I try not to do that, but looking at the book, you can tell that I do. I think that like chemical, nuclear, and biological warfare, those are chapters in the book. They're all things to be prepared for and to at least be cognizant of. And most biological warfare, a lot of it you can't protect yourself from. The only way to protect yourself, again, is vaccines. A lot of it is, if it's something novel, then it's an issue. But there are, for instance, we do have smallpox vaccines stockpiled within the United States. So there are, things that our country in the past has done to prepare for those types of things. But, if all of a sudden everyone isn't, vaccinating for measles, let's say, then yeah, that puts our country at high risk of being, attacked with biological weapons from elsewhere. So it is something that we should be afraid of just as much as, anything else. We have this huge military, but then we allow ourselves to be weakened internally. So it's something that to at least consider when you're making decisions for yourself and your loved ones is these are things that exist out there, and there are bad people that, would consider using these weaknesses.
Absolutely. I don't know. Are you familiar with the author, Annie Jacobson? Sorry to put you on the spot.
I'm really bad with names. What'd she write?
Many books, but her most recent one was called Nuclear War, A Scenario. And it walked through like what would happen and what that looks like if somebody launched a nuclear weapon and all the sort of automated things that go into place.
Yeah.
I bring it up because that book was huge. I think it's being turned into a movie, all that other stuff. She just announced recently she's doing a follow-up to that concept, and I think it's called Biological Warfare, A Scenario.
Yeah.
And it's exploring what that public response would be.
Totally.
And I'm very much looking forward to that and also terrified of it. Before we move off other countries, I've been very fortunate and blessed to climb Mount Kilimanjaro twice.
Cool.
When you went to Tanzania, what was that? Were you up in that region there, like in Moshi or Arusha, or were you somewhere else?
I was in both the Moshi and Arusha, as well as Dar es Salaam, but I didn't climb the mountain. And I talk about this a little bit in the book, but it's so funny because emergency medicine physicians have this again, if you watch The Pit, they do a great job. We're very stereotyped individuals, right? We love the outdoors. We love adventure, adrenaline junkies. I can't look at my feed without seeing someone that's climbed Mount Everest this week. Like all my friends are the perfect emergency medicine doctors who bike to work and then rock climb home. I am not. I enjoy sitting quietly in my house and writing and listening to audiobooks. And so when presented with the adventure of a lifetime to climb Mount Kilimanjaro, I was like, I'm good. I'll be here. I can read while you guys go do that, and then we'll go back to clinic. So I didn't do that, which is, maybe a missed opportunity there. But I will put myself out there to travel because I'm just so obsessed with other cultures and like the greatness that is humanity everywhere. And we're in such a dark place right now. I mean, in the US, I just feel like everything, there's not a lot of hope sometimes. And I feel like those types of things, there's so much good in our world still. And there's so many good people and so many good cultures, and they have so much to offer. So that's one of the things I'll put myself out there for, is traveling, even though I'm always the one on the trip that gets like whatever illness. I actually got malaria.
Oh my gosh.
I'm the one that gets, even though I'm taking prophylaxis, I'm always the one that gets the bug, but I'll still do it. And that's my adventure. I'll go. But when it comes to like, the extra adventure, like climbing Mount Kilimanjaro, I did pass on that, which I'm sure it was amazing. So maybe I lost this.
Just say, and I'm sure you appreciate this. I think one of the best parts of doing that trip is that time that you spend in Moshi and Arusha. And, we did a follow-on safari, as a lot of people do too, where you get a chance to meet a lot of different people and everything. And it really is a wonderful place to go visit. I constantly am railing against the stereotypes that people lump Africa together as if it's all one country. It is a massive continent with many different, the difference between Morocco and Kenya, or Kenya and Egypt, or Egypt and South Africa. These are wildly
like
different
us in
places.
Brazil. Like, it's not even close.
Literally. And so I always rail against that and just really encourage. I count a few porters and guides as friends at this point in that area, and always try to encourage people to go out there and use their services. But yeah, it's funny you say you're always the one that kind of like catches the thing or whatever. The first time that I did Kilimanjaro, I was fine. I was a little bit more worse for wear on the way down, because everybody gets some sort of mild hypoxia, even best case scenario.
Sure.
You just, you're going to have a few symptoms. The second time I did, I went back to do it with my brother and sister. It was a really special trip, and I was arguably, I think, in actually better shape the second time I did it, and I knew what to expect. I got the most severe altitude sickness, and it started kind of on the final ascent, the summit night.
Yeah.
And then by the time we got back down to base camp, I was like whiting out and delirious. And the only option you have is to just keep walking.
Oh yeah, because you got to get back down.
And you have to, once you summit that day, you start at midnight, and then you summit around 7 a.m. And then you come down and you just keep going down until you're back below tree line. So it's like an 18-hour day that you have to do. And I did it with what ended up being, kind of things coming out of both ends of my body the entire time, feeling like I was going to pass out the whole time. And they're like, once you get back below tree line, you'll be fine. You just need to get to where more oxygen is. And I'm like, okay. And then I couldn't sleep all night. I was dry heaving all night. And then the next morning, at that point, my brother who's with me, he's a very experienced paramedic. He worked in the inner city of Minneapolis for a long time and very experienced. His wife's a nurse, but like he was with me, and he was like, yeah, you need oxygen. Like you are at a bad place. And we actually had to kind of argue with the guides a little bit about that. And I ended up having to walk out of the park with an oxygen mask on while one of them held the O2 tank. And it was one of the hardest things. I've done some hard things in my life, Ashely. It was one of the hardest things I have ever done. I literally had to convince myself that I was in the Bataan Death March, and that if I quit walking, I would be shot. Like I had to put myself in that mental state just to keep going. And I say that not to scare people off from doing it, but I will just say that to say your concerns about maybe going that extra step on the adventures are well-founded, and I found that out the hard way.
I wrote a chapter about it. Altitude sickness is in there, as well as diving. I think we really take for granted what that type of stuff means. Like altitude sickness is like a really severe disease. And as you you unfortunately experience some of it, but both,
0 out of 10 do not recommend.
Yeah. And both the lung and brain forms of the disease can progress to death if you don't get back to a normal oxygen level. But what's really interesting, and I talk about a lot of like the history and sociology and just kind of like fun stuff in the book too, also to help people remember things, because stories is how we remember and kind of learn as humans. And one of the things I thought was really cool is that throughout, the world, in these like high altitude regions, like parts of Peru, there are, and like obviously in like the Himalayas, there are these people who have spent centuries, a century at least, in these communities, and they have developed, I kind of call them like X-Men, like they have developed abilities to live at this altitude and have actual changes in their genes and the way that they kind of function as humans. They breathe faster than us. They have different, when women at altitude have babies, they're, if I went up there and had a baby, being that I always lived I'm from San Diego, so clearly sea level, it would be very small because of the low oxygen. But up, at these altitude levels, they've actually, due to like genetic changes over many generations and, natural selection, they have been able to form larger arteries, uterine arteries. And so their babies are able to get more oxygen and they actually have larger babies. And so, these are just like amazing people who are able to live at these places and like basically tolerate very, very low oxygen for their entire lives. And it does nothing to them, where if one of us does it, we will die. If we stay up at that altitude, or if we go up to that altitude so quickly. Human beings are amazing. Like, it is amazing that we can do these things and that we can survive this way. And so I think that, those types of things are, things that maybe we don't think about or know about. And then, you go hiking with a friend up a mountain and you just like, you don't know about this type of a thing. And it's like, not that you didn't know about it in your circumstance, but I think that it's just something that like keep in mind when you're, planning to do those types of things. I think a lot of people, want to do the adventurous thing, which I think you should still do it if it's something that you want to do, but just like know how to do it the most safe way possible, which with you was to having a guide and having oxygen available. Like, thank God you had all of that. Don't go off and do something by yourself without knowing the consequences, at least.
And I'll add to that and say, like, don't skip the travel clinic before your trip. If you're going to a developing country or abroad, I'm not saying you need to go to a travel clinic for your, winter vacation to Paris or something. That's not probably necessary. But if you're going to a developing country or any place like that, go to the travel clinic, at least get their input. One thing that I found out going, because I went to go get the altitude pills. I forget what they're called right now. But you also need malaria pills, even though it's a minimal risk in that part of Tanzania. You should still take them. And one thing that I found is like, you actually shouldn't take malaria pills at the same time as the altitude pill, because the malaria pills make the altitude pill less effective. Basically, it counteracts it. I would never know that. I would have just, if I hadn't gone to a travel clinic, like, oh, I just need this and I just need that, and maybe my primary care also runs a travel clinic. That's how I got my primary care.
Sure.
So
smart.
In my situation, I would have been good. But for most people, if you just go to your primary care and ask them, they might not necessarily know that.
Yeah, I think you're probably on acetazolamide, and like some of the anti-malarials will definitely, cause that, and then some won't, but who knows all of this stuff? That's why somebody went to school to learn it. And so, it's definitely, worth protecting yourself when you're going, because there's nothing worse than being sick in another country. Trust me.
There really is.
It's awful.
Not to, just sit there and turn this into Marty's like medical story time here.
I like it.
But I've had food poisoning 3 times. Each one of them progressively worse than the last. The second time, I was in Mexico City filming. I was co-starring on a show for History Channel, and we were there doing all these different things. This was in 2015. We happened to be in Mexico City during the 2016 presidential election. If you recall that presidential election, it was a big topic was Mexico and the Latino community. And so we're in Mexico City, and me, the production crew, the night of the election, the production crew, the producers, everybody, we're all in one hotel room. We're watching it, and we're watching it like, oh my God, I can't believe this has happened. Like, Florida fell to Trump. Like, and it was like this, because nobody, I think even conservatives, didn't think that Trump was going to win. And so it's the shocking thing. And then you're in Mexico City, you're like at a Mexican hotel. Anyways, I say all that as preamble to, it was a riveting night of television watching election coverage in Mexico City. And we didn't go out to eat or anything like that. I just ran across the street to a little like convenience store, like bodega type thing, and grabbed a couple of hot dogs.
Oh, no.
And you might say, Marty, why would you get hot dogs in Mexico City? That seems like a terrible idea. I wasn't thinking. I ate these things, and by midnight, I was already starting to get like a little bit of like heartburn and stuff. The next morning we were flying out. We had to fly out from Miami for our next shooting location. Yeah. And by the time I got on the plane, thank God I wasn't sitting in first. my other co-star was, he swapped seats with me. I lost count on about my 13th time to the lavatory on that plane.
You didn't sit in first. You sat in the bathroom.
And I wasn't even on the aisle seat. I was on the window seat. So this poor guy had to keep getting up for me. And he was great. He didn't make me feel bad. He knew what was going on. He kind of looked at it like, yeah, Mexico, right? Like,
I got sick. It was funny. I got sick in Egypt, but I got sick before I went to Egypt and had some virus or food poisoning. The whole time I was there, I was vomiting, but I was not going to miss Egypt. So there's photos of me like on a camel in front of the pyramids, just holding a barf bag, like, yeah, I'm doing this.
You're not going to just sit in the hotel the whole time. You're going to go
Egypt. I'm going. Yeah. So yeah.
See, this is where you say you're not adventurous. I think, going out sick in Egypt on camel rides, that counts as a little bit adventurous.
A little bit,
maybe it's not climbing mountains,
dangerous.
But
I could have fallen off and survived. So no, I draw the line at death-defying feats for the most part. But yeah, no, I mean, there was some adventure for sure. It was a long time ago. But yeah, I mean, I'll do it for travel. That's what I said. I'll go out on a limb for travel.
That's amazing. And I feel the same way. I'm obsessed with travel. I love it. It's and I'm sure for you as an emergency physician, you get, and especially in the part of the country you live in the, like Virginia, mid-Atlantic area, diverse population there. I'm sure you get all sorts of people into the ER from different parts of the world.
Oh, for sure.
And the fact that you're probably able to connect with a lot of them or name a city or two where they're from, or maybe say a few words in their language, I imagine that goes a really long way.
Yeah, I grew up in San Diego and was lucky enough to kind of pick up Spanish along the way in life. Definitely not in high school or middle school, because no one picks up Spanish in middle school for some reason. But eventually I learned Spanish enough that I don't have to use translators, and then French too. And then my Greek from living in Cyprus is very, very poor. I can basically introduce myself. But yeah, I think like just being able to, relate to people and be like, oh, I've been there type thing. People are always surprised. My favorite though is when I walk into the room, because I mean, in San Diego, kind of people would assume that you spoke Spanish a lot of the time. Even if you look like me. But when out here, not so much. Where I live, at least, is a little bit rural. And so anytime I walk in and I start speaking Spanish to a patient, they're always like, whoa, kind of surprised.
It just blows them away.
I was kind of surprised by it. And I'm like, oh, yes.
Yeah.
But they're also
that's so cool.
They're also very kind to me about it. Like, I'm sure like some of my tenses are off and stuff. And they're like, yeah, I get it. Just help me with the abdominal pain. So, it's definitely helpful. And I feel very privileged to have been able to spend a lot of my life in these other places, learning from other cultures and, just amazing people everywhere. Like that was the thing that kind of floored me is, even at 19, I went to Qatar by myself, which I don't recommend going anywhere by yourself as a 19-year-old woman. But, there's so much fear like around, going different places. And especially like, within America, I think that there's so much fear of other cultures and like the other. But people are so kind and so welcoming. And even, I wish that we could interact more with other cultures. America is so vast and is so different that I think we get caught up in our own kind of subculture. And it's very easy, like, a majority of Americans for a long time didn't have passports. I don't know if that's still true.
I think it's still the majority do not.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's very sad that like we live in a country that's, one of the wealthiest in the world and people can't afford to travel. And then secondarily that people don't travel. And, why is that? Because I think that creating those relationships really created who I am and how much I care about people. And, as a lot of the book is kind of like time I've spent in other countries and things that I've seen there and, diseases that, are very survivable that people have died from that we have the privilege of either not having in this country or, have treatment for. So, that's kind of a large part of the book and hopefully something that's both entertaining and educational.
Yeah, I'm probably butchering the quote, but there's a famous quote that's essentially travel is the cure for hate and bigotry or something to that effect. It's something to that effect. And I do think that that's the case.
Sure.
I think it's really hard for you to hate a group of people if you know that group of people. It's just a lot harder. There's probably some exceptions where people get to know a group of people and like, man, I really do not vibe with this particular culture. Maybe that's the case, but for the most part, I think when you talk to people who've traveled extensively, they're completely enchanted with everywhere else. And that doesn't mean that you hate your own country or anything like that. It's just, it's a big world and there's a lot of places to see, people to meet, and it's incredible.
You know, that's important. It's an important, we are a global society, and it is important that you care about other places and what they're doing and what is happening to their people. And so I think that that's, if you've been to Paris or, you know, Rio de Janeiro or wherever it is you've been, you care if you hear something happens to one of those places. So I think it's just a way of teaching us how to invest in other humans and teaching us empathy, which is something that our society is severely lacking right now, unfortunately. And I think that's a lot of the book too. I'm trying to show you these diseases, even though maybe we haven't suffered from them in some time in the United States, or maybe you personally, you know, might not be confronted by something. Like there's empathy to be had here. And then there's also just like general knowledge and things that you probably want to know about, because, you know, most people don't know that, hey, rabies is, you know, basically 100% fatal. And if you wake up with a bat in the room, even if you have no bite on you, you need immediate prophylaxis. And if they've bitten you and they have rabies, you will die from it, you know? And that post-exposure prophylaxis is something that people don't know about because we don't really talk about it. We're just like, oh, you know, people will figure it out that they got a bat bite. Well, bat bites are painless and you can't really see them. So so just being around a bat is enough. And, you know, that's something that, unfortunately, actually, she was one of the only people that ever survived from it. But a child in Milwaukee who was bit by a bat got rabies. And she was one of the only people who ever survived with this very specific sedation protocol that's had very limited, if like very basically no success in others. There's a couple people down in South America who have tried like similar protocols on people with rabies. But regardless, she actually did survive, which is amazing. And her parents were asked in an interview, like, why didn't you take her after she they knew she got bit by a bat? Why didn't you take her to get rabies post-exposure prophylaxis? And they're like, we didn't know. Like, we didn't know that was a thing. So there's all these like little things that people don't know about, you know, honey in children under 1. You know, botulism can be caused by that. You know, don't create your own baby formula at home. Like, you know, there are very specific things that you need to worry about, including water quantity. You can't feed water to children under 6 months old. You can cause brain swelling and seizures. And you also can't dilute their formula. So like, there's very specific things that we have these gaps in our society's knowledge because we haven't done the public health education that we should be doing. And we are not doing it in a way that's very captivating. Like, you know, it's hard to do it. And I think that's one of the reasons we're not doing it, is it's hard to be captivating. And that's where the TV stuff came in, like how I kind of got into the TV technical consulting and screenwriting for medical television, and why I've worked on all the shows I've worked on is because it's a way to like create an engaging story and fit true science and medicine into a storyline. Like there's nothing cooler than that. To me, I think that is like the ultimate thing, to be able to help people understand and create empathy and save lives using stories and using real medicine and science to do it. I just think that that's so cool. And the people that do it right are just, they're genius. It's awesome.
Yeah. I'm a fan of medical television too. I'm curious what shows you've worked on. When I was still in the military, my 4th deployment in Iraq, I binged all the seasons of Scrubs. And became a big show. And now that that's coming back with all the original characters, I'm very excited about that. Yeah. And I met my wife because I went to, she lived with all of her roommates in college in Savannah, Georgia. She's from Boston, but she went to college to an art school down there. And me and my friends, we were all in the Army, came over to like, they were like, we do Grey's Anatomy night. And they would do this every week that came out. And so I met my wife at Grey's Anatomy night. Oh, and I never was like a Grey's Anatomy guy, but I will always credit the show with, it played a small part in the life that I have now.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Yeah. Well, speaking of my wife actually I want to bring up, because one of the big things in the book, and one of the sort of I don't know if it's fair to call it the thesis of the book, but one of the underlying motivations, it seems, is that there are all these things that you might not know about, but absolutely can kill you if you don't know that they can kill you, and that you need to ask somebody about that, and you need to go see a doctor. You might need to go to the ER depending on some of these situations.
Sure.
And I recently had a similar situation. So my wife is a type 1 diabetic, and she got sick this fall in November.
My
and
husband is a type 1 diabetic.
Oh, we can talk about that too. I've lived the life.
Same.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on. That's too big of a commonality not to just tell you. Go on.
Absolutely. But she started feeling sick, and the cold had been going around, and so everybody got it. Everybody didn't feel great. And she got it on let's call it like a Thursday, I think it was. And then she just continued to feel worse and worse over the weekend. And it was one of those things where it's like, okay, it's just hitting you harder, and whatever. But it got to the point, like on Sunday, she's like, I really don't feel good. And it's like, all right, let's try to get you into your primary care tomorrow. And so we made that appointment. We go in at like 11:30 that Monday, the next day. So she's been sick for 3 or 4 days now. She can't keep any food down. She can't keep any water down. She's dry heaving, like just over and over and over again. And it's bad. And we're like, she probably just needs fluids. Like if we can get her an IV, she's probably going to spring right back. And when she was pregnant, she went through a similar thing with morning sickness, where she just couldn't stop throwing up. And that all leads into this. In retrospect, now we didn't know. We didn't put the puzzle pieces together. But we go in, and the primary care was like, yeah, I agree. You probably just need fluids. So I'd also love for you to get some labs done, but like fluids. So we can't do that here. So head over to the urgent care. So we go over to the urgent care from there, and we're waiting. You know how urgent cares go. They're, not too dissimilar from an ER in the fact that you're going to wait in the waiting room for a while. And if you're not urgent, and she started having these really bad low blood sugars in the waiting room of the urgent care while we were waiting for her to be seen. And then she started to kind of like pass out a little bit. And we thought it was just her being really tired from being sick, but it was her losing consciousness. And finally, the other person in the waiting room was a off-duty nurse. And she was like, hey, you need to go tell them she needs to be seen now. I was like, oh, okay. And, so I go and tell them. They bring her back. They start checking her blood pressure and talking to her a little bit. She's still conscious at this point, but like just not really with it. They check her blood pressure. I forget the exact numbers. I want to say it was like 57/37 or something like that. And they were like, she needs to go to the ER. And both her and I were a little bit resistant. We're like, really? I think she just needs fluids. I think she'll feel fine if she gets some, a bag or two of saline, and they were like, well, we're calling the ambulance and you can talk to the medics. But the medics get there, and they were very cool, calm, and collected. But at that point, they're talking to the medical staff at urgent care, and the urgent care nurse, and we're still like, and it's not just me, I'm not like talking for my wife here. She also was like, I just need an IV bag. I don't want to go to the ER.
Yeah, I know the feeling.
And and as you know, with your husband being a type 1 diabetic, you get tired of going to the doctor. You get tired of being poked and prodded all the time, and that's kind of how she is at this point. And I think it was a PA in there. She looked right at me and she was like, her blood pressure right now is not at a level that supports human life.
Yeah.
Like flat out. And it was like, oh, yeah. Okay. So yeah, let's get her to the ER. To cut a long story short, we end up going to the ER. Fantastic group of people there. Through a series of tests, they find out that she was in adrenal crisis. And had we waited even another half day, she might not be with us. She was at that point where she was slipping in and out of consciousness, blood pressure low, constant low blood sugars that wouldn't come up, like at that point. And I'm sitting here like, what's adrenal crisis? I've never even heard of this before. She's been like this before and we didn't do anything about it. She'd come in and get fluids, and it turns out that was just a Band-Aid. Mm-hmm. She's had this for a long time, and this was the time that she got into it. And so I bring that up to say, Ashely, when there is no worse feeling in the world as a loved one, as somebody's spouse or as a parent, to find out after the fact and know that your loved one's life came within that close of ending prematurely because you didn't give the proper gravity to what was going on and just say, yeah, let's just go do the ER visit.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean,
and so that's a very recent thing for me.
I'm sorry.
That's one of the reasons I was so excited to talk to you in this book, because it is an adrenal crisis. I don't think is one of the things in this book, but it is one of those things I'm sure you've ran into where people are like, wait, what's adrenal crisis?
Well, especially the first time, if you know you have adrenal insufficiency, it's far more obvious, right? It's that first diagnosis that's really hard to pin down. So that situation sounds terrible. I'm so sorry. That sounds scary. But I'm glad that you got to the ER and like, you know, people are always like, oh, I have to wait. If you're sick like that, you never should have to wait. So like that's the person that will get seen and taken care of immediately. It's so funny. There's this thing called Press-Ganey scores that like, you know, whether or not, you know, people like their medical care, they like rate you 1 to 10, and administrators love it because it's a very like MBA happy process to rate doctors, right? But the interesting thing is they've done studies in the emergency department, and the people who rate their care the highest are the most likely to die. You know why that is?
Really?
It's because the people who are most likely to die get seen first, and the people with a rash are sitting in the waiting room for 8 hours, and they are so frustrated, and their care is a 0, you know? So I think that that's what happens when we don't have, I mean, you were able to get into your primary care doctor, which is amazing, but like when we don't have primary care and we don't have a system that's working, you know, it gets inundated with, you know, people that probably shouldn't be in the emergency department, but they have no other choice. And then, you know, sometimes the people who are sick end up in the waiting room like you did at that urgent care, which is also not appropriate, you know? You know, maybe when you got there, her vitals were fine, but you know, that sounds very scary. And I'm so sorry that happened. So she has to deal with that and the diabetes now. My husband got diabetes when he was 4. So, you know, we're on that train too. He has type 1, which I mean, there's a lot of things about, you know, people say, oh, they have diabetes, he can't eat sugar. I'm like, no, he has type 1. It's an autoimmune disease. It's way different, you know? So, but
I wish they would call it a different thing.
I know, me too, because it has nothing to do, it's not a metabolic disorder. It's an autoimmune disease. You do not make insulin. So, you know, that is, you know, these like little subtleties all through medicine are just, and they're things that are so teachable and they're so knowable. This is not difficult science, you know? And I do get into some nitty gritty science in the book, but if it bores you, just skip it. It's the way that I wrote the book like that on purpose. So you can pick it up, just read whatever chapter you want, put it back down. You know, I'm don't tell anyone, but I'm more of a fiction reader. And so like, I get it. Sometimes people like are like, oh, nonfiction, this is, you know, I don't know if I'm going to be able to finish this or whatnot. And I like really wrote it so people could pick it up, put it down. The chapters are very short for that Gen Z mindset if they want to read it and are interested. So, you know, you don't have to read this book all at once because it is dense. There's a lot of information in there. But, you know, I try to, the situation that you're in, you know, with your wife, how scary that was. It was, like you said, it was like, you were like, what's going on? It's not a good opportunity to learn. Like when an emergency is going on, all you want is fix my emergency. So like when I'm in the emergency department, you know, I always do shared decision making with my patients. So I make sure that they have the information that they need to make the right decision for them. But it's not, I'm not pontificating. I'm not sitting there telling you how enzymes work. I'm not sitting there, you know, telling you why vaccines are important and why you should get vaccinated. That's not my job as a physician. But in this book, that is my job. It is my job to sit down and really give you the nitty gritty and like the whys and the hows. And that's what I tried to do because I think people want those and they're smart enough to understand them. And we don't give people that credit. I just think that sometimes we're not smart enough to explain them. And that's something we have to work on as a medical community. And that's how we rebuild trust. And that's how we meet people where they are.
Yeah, I mean, some of it is branding, and you do an excellent job of this in the book. I love that you call yourself a death escapologist. Yeah, I say escapologist, but I think that's the British pronunciation because I said it, and they're like, "Are you British?" I'm like, "No," but sometimes I do have a fake accent. So, yeah, I love that. When I read that, I think it was right there in your intro or your author's note or something. I was like, "Oh, that's clever." I love that.
The whole job, man. Just evade death, right, left. I mean, eventually we all lose, but like there's no point to you can't lay down. You got to fight, you know?
You exactly go out, go out swinging. I want to go through a couple of medical things. These are maybe more like quick fire sort of questions with you. I mean, I've got a bona fide doctor on the other end of the screen here with me. I would be remiss.
Surprised you haven't been like, can you check this mole on my shoulder?
I've already told enough medical stories. I have some restraint.
Fair. Okay, good.
You know, if this was an in-person interview, it may have been going a little bit differently. But you know, fortunately, we've got a couple 100 miles between us right now. So for heart attacks and strokes, these are things that a lot of people deal with in across the country, either themselves or their loved ones. This is I imagine, one of the more common reasons you find yourself in the ER, especially once you get to be, I don't know, 40 and above, I guess. What are like 2 or 3 of the don't ignore this symptoms that could send somebody to the ER like right now if they see?
Yeah. So I always tell my patients, don't ignore chest pain ever. Do not ignore chest pain. There's no reason to. You have one heart. And don't ignore stroke symptoms. You have one brain. So chest pain, period. And then stroke symptoms, so one-sided weakness, numbness, slurred speech, facial droop, vision changes. These are all things that if you have these things, you need to immediately go to an emergency department.
Yeah, that is one thing you don't want to mess around with. And again, I think about my brother who's a paramedic. That's the one thing that keeps him up at night is cardiac things.
Sure.
It's a scary thing and nothing you want to mess around with. Again, you have a section in here generally called butt stuff. I'm not going to go specifically into that right now, but I do love how you have like an entire sort of like sex chapter on that approaches this in a funny way, but without shame for anybody or anything like that. What are the most fixable mistakes people make that lead to emergencies in that side of medicine?
I mean, I guess in the sex part of medicine?
Yeah.
Oh, that's easy. Wear a condom. But unfortunately, they don't work 100% of the time, which we don't tell everybody for some reason. So, you know, you can still get HPV. You can still get, you know, syphilis, gonorrhea, chlamydia. But a lot of these infections, not HPV, but, you know, syphilis, gonorrhea, chlamydia, these are treatable. So, you know, get tested. This is something you can fix. No big deal type thing. You know, I mean, better not to get it, but like you can get treated. Unfortunately, gonorrhea is on the watch list for the CDC because it is becoming resistant to antibiotics. So that is a whole nother issue, but that is definitely something that is fixable. And then, you know, a shout out to the butt stuff chapter. They make things that go there. Buy those. Like, don't create your own thing at home. There's, you know, it is crazy to me the amount of times I've seen this, but like the same things over and over.
Not a DIY project.
Yeah, it is not. It's not. Just, you know, and I kind of make light of it in the book, and I say, you know, use your friend's credit card or go pay in cash. Do whatever you need to do. You know, the emergency department is not somewhere we care. Like, people are dying. Like, we're there to help you, and that's it. There's no judgment. We honestly don't care what people choose to do. It just, you have so many compartments and so much to do in that situation that you don't care why or how. All you're going to do is help the person fix it. But, you know, preventing it would be great for both for you and for the emergency department. So, you know, just safety first.
Really good advice.
Yep.
You know, you're usually somebody that, you know, your job is to save people from dying, but are there any first aid myths that you would just like to kill forever?
Oh my God, there's a ton of them. They're all perpetuated, not all, but a lot of them were perpetuated by television, which is another way that I kind of got into that. Is dispelling medical misinformation is like a big passion of mine. So, you know, doctors generally don't search for bullets. You can sleep after you have a concussion. You know, you don't need neurotex. That's for brain bleeds. You know, there's tons of things. Carrots aren't really good for your eyesight. That was made up by the British.
Today I learned.
During World War II, when they started to develop the Air Force, basically was trying to trick trick Nazi Germany into thinking that the pilot's eyesight had gotten so much better because they were eating more carrots instead of the development of, you know, radar. So, and actually they got Walt Disney in on it too. And he created this whole cartoon carrot family. And there was this huge propaganda thing. And, you know, grandmas everywhere went out to buy carrots. Unless you have a deficiency, it's not going to make your eyesight better. If you have a deficiency, then it could. But for the most part, they're just good vegetables. So, you know, eat them for that reason. So there's a lot of them. I list a ton in my book. There's, you know, medical misinformation has gone on forever. And some of it's okay. Some of it we let go because it teaches you the right stuff. Like, for instance, tetanus being in rust is not true, but tetanus is in dirt, and there's usually dirt associated with rust. Thus, tetanus is there. So get a tetanus shot. There's no reason to correct that for the most part. But, there are strings of truth in a lot of old wives' tales. But, Campbell's chicken soup isn't going to be changing your cold, and your air conditioner doesn't cause disease. There's no, bacteria or viruses. You can't catch a chill by having wet hair. So there's a lot of those in there, but for the most part, I think they're all well-meaning, but definitely some things that we can correct.
I had no idea about the carrots. I literally thought that those were something that would improve your eyesight as a 39-year-old living in 2026, fairly educated. Like, man, that's news to me. But the history behind that and the Walt Disney thing, that's fat. I mean, if that's not, I was going to say, if that's not reason enough to pick up the book, that there's history like that in there, that is fascinating to me. And I'll throw another one out there too. That's a popular one that goes around that you can use. This goes around like the first responder military communities a lot, but that you can use a tampon to stop bleeding or a hemorrhaging limb. And that's not a thing. You can't do that. There was some people for a while that were saying, use a tampon as an expedient way to stop bleeding. It's horrible. It doesn't work. That's not a thing that you should do.
Tourniquet on that. I mean, especially military bleeding. This isn't little stuff. This is like
hemorrhaging.
Bleeding. Yeah. It's not. You gotta get more involved in that. Sorry.
Yes. There actually was an entire campaign through the military to dispel that myth.
Oh, good.
Because it was such a problem.
Yeah, that's great that they had a campaign. I mean, those are the types of things we need to do now, is try and get people the right information. But it's getting harder and harder, and with deep fakes and AI, we're just so far behind.
Oh my gosh!
So hopefully my book will fix all of it.
Yeah.
Although I doubt.
It's, or at least make people more aware for sure. What's the most underrated safety upgrade for families that you'd buy before any sort of medical gadget?
I mean, honestly, you don't have to buy anything. I'm not selling things. That's the other thing. This book is not selling you anything. I don't have any vitamins. I'm not selling you devices. It's just information. Go use it. And you don't have to buy the book. You can get it off of Libby or from a library. I'm just trying to help out. I don't care if you buy it, borrow it. Just check out the information in it. And so I think that one of the most useful pieces of information would be the Back to Sleep campaign. So putting children in a bed on their back without any blankets or toys in the bed when they're under a year old. That campaign has, cost nothing and saved thousands and thousands of young lives. As somebody who's seen SIDS personally, and has, seen what that does. I mean, it's just awful. There's nothing I can say about it. There's nothing, that type of thing breaks you.
Literal nightmare fuel for any parent out there.
And I've talked to a lot of emergency docs about this because I am really affected by my job. And, they say that every doctor has a number, and you see that type of thing so many times, and eventually you'll be done because you can't see it anymore. But if I can save one life by telling people that and not, helping families understand that small truth, that's awesome.
I think that point about there being a number there, and that's where people hang it up. Again, it's something I've heard from paramedics a lot of. You do one too many kid calls, and it just, you can't do it anymore. You're not sleeping right. You brought this up at towards the beginning of the episode, but I think it bears repeating. The things that emergency personnel go through to keep us all healthy and get us back on our feet, the things that you all have to see, that you have to endure, the missed holidays, the long shifts, everything that you go through, we can't thank you enough because it is hard. And I don't care, as a doctor, I'm sure you're well compensated. It's like you said, it's not about the money. It's there are things that money can't solve, and the things that you've had to treat, the heartbreak that you've had to deal with and be there for patients in the room. That is not something that that is deep human trauma. And you do that on behalf, you and your nurses and your staff do that on behalf of the rest of us, where we know on our worst day, we've got people there that are competent and trained to hopefully send us back home.
And I have to say, they're just the best staff. They are the best. The emergency department, Yeah, we're a little rough around the edges, but
Great sense of humor,
they
though. I love the
a
gallows
little
humor.
dark. So if you don't like dark humor,
Yeah.
but they're the best people. The nurses are the best nurses. The techs are the best techs. The respiratory therapists are the best respiratory therapists. I just I think that's what keeps me going is like it's that and like the patience, the wins and like being able to be there for people on their worst day. It really is a privilege. Like as hard as my
Hmm.
job is and the things that it's taken me to, and I have terrible timing. I came out of my really hard residency right into the pandemic in 2019. Like it has not been a good timeline. I have terrible timing, but this has been the privilege of my life. Aside from my, being a mom and my daughter, like being a doctor is just being there for people on their worst day and having their trust on that day is just something that, I've given everything for and I will continue to do that because it means that much to me. But it is a lot and, that's part of the reason I write. It's catharsis. So sorry.
It
I hope to
is.
read it.
No, it really is. Well, I have two more questions here, and they are on kind of a more serious note here, but they're questions I really want to ask. The first is there a case that changed your practice or the way that you approach medicine?
Oh God, yes. I mean, we any bad case, any outcome, even if it has nothing to do with you and it's a bad outcome, it changes everything about your practice. And that's the human component, right? This is like we talk about the people that don't want to vaccinate. Well, maybe something terrible happened in their life and that's why. Maybe their child, had something happen to them. Maybe they had a febrile seizure and they associated that febrile seizure, whether it was the vaccine or not, and febrile seizures, thank God, kids usually grow out of them and they're not generally dangerous, but they're still traumatic for the parents to ever have to see a child have a seizure. So, you don't know what people have been through, and those things really affect how we act, even when we're smart enough to know better. And that's the same. And I mean, doctors are generally considered to be intelligent. I know what's best practice, but every time there's a bad outcome, whatever it is, it makes you more conservative. You're more and more careful. And some of it with time, you learn and you try not to be too conservative, but you're more and more careful. You'll offer more tests, maybe you'll hold patients in the ED longer just to watch them to make sure they're okay. It depends on what the exact case is, but yeah, those cases, even though you practiced by the book and did what you were supposed to do, if there's a bad outcome, the next time you'll think every kid has that. And you'll think every, 29-year-old male that comes in has it. And you'll try and make sure you don't ever, maybe miss something or, maybe it just is the way that's the pathophysiology of the disease and there was nothing you could do, but it doesn't matter because it's emotional and you're a human and you care about this person because they're your patient. It changes your practice.
Yeah, I mean, the calculus that you have to do, especially after you've got a few years under your belt like you do, I mean, you've been doing this for a minute now. Like, I'm sure you've seen and done a lot and, you've weathered more than a few storms. The last thing I want to ask about, you mentioned your mom and that she was sort of an inspiration for your, not just pursuit of the medicine, but also wanting to translate it for people because your family just didn't know the questions to ask or how to receive the answers, as you've talked about a little bit on this. And it's tough to lose a parent, especially young. And unfortunately, ALS has ran rampant through my family. I've had multiple aunts and uncles, and unfortunately, my dad passed away. That's a tough one, but also easy in the fact that there is no cure for it. It is a death sentence, and there is some simplicity there of how this story ends. It's a matter of when, not if, with that particular thing. But having experienced that and seen some of the dynamics that go on around that, I'm wondering, do you have advice for listeners who have to be a loved one's medical advocate during end of life or potentially end of life situations?
Yeah, I mean, having personally gone through that with like my mom, who was my best friend and, kind of my everything at that point in my life. I think the biggest thing is to have conversations early and be honest. Make sure your loved ones know what you want and what you're, end of life care plan is. Do you want to be resuscitated? Under what condition do you want to be resuscitated? Do you want to be intubated, which is the tube in the throat? What do you want? And make that known, because one, you never want your family member to have to make that decision, because it becomes a pressure, because we have this internal struggle to stay alive no matter what, but we're all going to die. And that is what it is. And we're going to fight as long as we can. But sometimes, as you said, if something's terminal, maybe for you, the fight is over and you don't need to suffer. And you need to be able to make that decision. And we don't have to do CPR, and we don't have to prolong your suffering. And I think that those are important decisions to make with your family early, and conversations to have when you're not in an emergency department, and when you're not confronted with the fact that, mortality is something that we all face, because that's not when you want to have that conversation. And that's definitely not when you want your family member making that decision for you. Because it's the hardest decision anyone will ever have to make.
It really is, and it's something, unfortunately, it's why I asked the question, because I think a lot of people don't think of that until it is that time, and nor do I think people should have to walk around thinking about that, but it is something to think about ahead of time, especially when you're thinking about planning, especially like, once you start having kids and you have to have other considerations and other people that are impacted, it's like, these are just things that you have to think about ahead of time. I usually love, Ashely, I have covered some really serious stuff on this podcast. So far, it's a relatively new podcast, but I always try to end it on a lighter note. And this one was kind of the reverse. We had a very lighthearted conversation, ended on sort of a darker note there, but no, it's fine. We'll end it on it with a smile still. And I will say, I just realized too, I won't out him because he doesn't give me permission to talk about this. I won't say the name, but the producer on with us right now that's not on, his spouse is also a type 1 diabetic. So all three of us on this call right now are type 1.
They're wonderful people. I do love people.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it is a wonderful life. I'm envious of you being a medical professional to deal with it, because I'm sure you understand it at a...
But it also makes me annoying for him, I think. I will say, I do think that the cure is around the horizon, and it's so much, but with CGMs and external pumps, it's basically an external pancreas.
I sleep so much better at night ever since they made it so that you can check on your phone. It doesn't matter where I am in the world.
Yeah.
I can see what the blood sugar is. It'll alert if it's going too low. Just the peace of mind that these CGMs, really.
Especially for kids.
That fact, you said your husband was diagnosed at 4. My wife was diagnosed as a freshman in college at 19. So it's never an easy diagnosis, but easier at that age. I cannot imagine, and I know there's people that get diagnosed even younger than that. Like, as a parent, that would be as stressed as I get at times when treating highs or lows are what really scare me, because I know there's more margin for error on the high side than there is the low side. And just the stress that you go through as a loved one, I can't imagine dealing with that with a young, infant or toddler that can't communicate that they're feeling not great. And my heart goes out to every parent that has to endure that. Just as an adult supporting somebody with type 1 diabetes, it can be hard. Certainly not as hard as it is to have type 1 diabetes. That's the ultimate, test there. But I don't want to steal valor here. But
people and loving people with chronic diseases, like it's hard, because when you care about someone, there's a lot of empathy, and empathy isn't easy to have. It has its own pain with it. But they are just resilient, wonderful people. My husband has taught me so much about like life and perseverance, and he's like I'm kind of the dark cloud, and he's like the bright sunshine. So
that's amazing.
Which is hilarious, right? Because like adversity for him, and then me none. And so anyways, I'm going to be the negative one. But it just it creates amazing resilience, and he's an amazing person. So and I'm sure your wife is too.
Yeah, she's all right. She'll listen to this. She knows I love her. The book is 99 Ways to Die and How to Avoid Them by Dr. Ashely Alker. Can you hold it up one more time just for the people on camera so they know what to look for on the cover?
Oh yeah, the side-lying skeleton.
Oh, I love it. That is a very
That
The pose from Seinfeld, is that what you were pulling that from?
it was just in my head. They sent me the skeleton
Oh.
on his back, and I'm like, no, make it sexy. But and this is wolfsbane. This is one of the poisonous flowers in the book, and it's hanging from his mouth.
Those are the sort of like inside details about covers that I love to get. The last book that I did, the person that was written about was somebody who was killed in Syria, but she spoke 7 languages. She was a cryptologist, so a lot of cryptology work.
Yeah.
And I only recently, now that it's been out for over a year, started revealing that part of the cover design, there's binary code on it.
Cool.
And I just only recently started telling people that if you actually know how to decode binary code or like were to copy and paste that in, you will see that I used binary code specifically that spells out the Navy Chief's creed.
That's really cool.
And which she was a naval chief. So there's that creed and that spells that out. And it's just the background 1s and 0s that are on the design.
That's cool.
But it's like, I love Easter eggs on book covers.
Me too.
I absolutely love it.
Yes, obviously. I'm with you.
All right. Well, one more time, 99 Ways to Die and How to Avoid Them. That is available right now everywhere books are sold. Let's go ahead and help Ashely. Dr. Alker, get on the bestseller list. This is a fantastic book, and I can't recommend it enough. Ashely, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it. It was wonderful to talk.
Thanks for having me.